For 6 long years her world was confined to the silent, opulent walls of a penthouse, caring for a man imprisoned within his own body. Audrey Collins, a waitress with calloused hands and a resilient heart, devoted her life to the shattered soul of Harrison Blackwood, a billionaire paralyzed by tragedy and bitterness. She endured his rage, soothed his nightmares, and became his only anchor in a world that had forgotten him. But when the day of miracles arrived and Harrison took his first steps, he didn't reward her with gratitude. He delivered a blow so cruel, so public, it was designed to shatter her completely. This is the story of a sacrifice that was met with an unthinkable act of betrayal, and a final truth that no one saw coming. The advertisement in the paper was deceptively simple: caregiver wanted. Live-in position. Excellent compensation. Discretion essential. For Audrey Collins, wrist deep in soapy water at the Dawnlight Diner, excellent compensation were the 2 most beautiful words in the English language. They whispered of a way out from under the mountain of her late mother's medical bills, out of her cramped, drafty apartment, and out of the endless cycle of double shifts that left her bones aching and her dreams deferred. At 24, Audrey's life was a study in shades of grey. Her one splash of colour was a worn-out cookbook, its pages softened by flour and stained with vanilla, a relic of her dream to one day own a small bakery. But bakeries were built on capital, not dreams, and so she served coffee and wiped down counters, her smile a little dimmer with each passing year. The address on the advertisement led her not to a suburban house or a quiet care facility, but to the Blackwood Tower, a skyscraper that pierced the clouds, a monument of glass and steel that seemed to mock the gritty city below. The interview was conducted by a woman named Genevieve Vance, a vision of sharp angles, and Chanel whose smile never quite reached her cold, assessing eyes. She was Harrison Blackwood's sister. My brother had an accident. Genevieve explained, her voice as smooth and hard as polished marble. A car crash 2 years ago. He was spirited. He drove too fast. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, not sadness, but a kind of resentful impatience. He has been left paraplegic. His disposition is challenging. We've gone through 12 caregivers in 2 years. They lack fortitude. Audrey, who had once talked a knife-wielding drunk out of robbing the diner with nothing but a calm voice and a free slice of apple pie, simply nodded. I have fortitude. Genevieve's lips tightened. Mr. Blackwood's needs are extensive. Physical assistance medication, management meal preparation. But more than that, you will be required to tolerate his moods. He is not the man he once was. He can be vitriolic. The penthouse was breathtaking. It occupied the entire top floor with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of a world Harrison Blackwood could see but never touch. Yet the opulence felt sterile, a museum of a life that was over. Priceless art hung on the walls, but the air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and despair. It was a gilded cage, and in its center sat its resentful prisoner. Harrison Blackwood was 32, but looked a decade older. He was slumped in a state-of-the-art wheelchair, a cashmere blanket draped over his useless legs. His face, which tabloids had once described as lethally handsome, was now gaunt, framed by unkempt dark hair and shadowed by a permanent scowl. His eyes, a startlingly intense shade of blue, were filled with a burning, impotent rage. He watched Audrey approach with the predatory stillness of a wolf. Another one, he rasped his voice, rough from disuse. Did my dear sister tell you the turnover rate, or did she just flash the checkbook and hope for the best? Audrey stopped a respectable distance away. She told me the position was challenging. He gave a short, bitter laugh. challenging. That's my sister's word for impossible. What's your story, Waitress? Desperate running from something. They're always one or the other. He gestured with his chin towards the window. They all come up here thinking they can fix me. They chatter about positive thinking and the beauty of the sunrise. They don't last. The view gets old, and so do I. Audrey's gaze was steady. She didn't look at his chair. She looked at him. My name is Audrey Collins. I'm here to do a job, Mr. Blackwood. I don't expect it to be easy. I just expect to be treated with basic, human decency. He stared at her for a long moment, a flicker of surprise in his icy glare. He was used to fear, or worse, pity. He wasn't used to being addressed as an equal. He picked up a heavy leather-bound book from the table beside him, and with a sudden, violent movement, hurled it at the wall just inches from her head. It struck with a sickening thud, pages splaying open before it clattered to the floor. Audrey didn't flinch. She didn't gasp. She simply watched the book fall, then slowly bent down, picked it up and straightened the pages. She placed it back on the table. That was not decent. She said, her voice quiet but firm. Please don't do it again. For the first time in 2 years, Harrison Blackwood was silent. He saw no fear in her eyes, only a weary resolve that seemed to match his own. He hated her for it. He hated her for not being breakable. He turned his chair sharply, wheeling himself towards the vast window. Get out! Make my dinner! And don't speak to me unless you're spoken to. As Audrey walked towards the kitchen, a gleaming expanse of stainless steel that had likely never been used, she felt the weight of her decision settle upon her. This was not just a job. This was a battle of wills, a daily war to be waged against the ghost of the man Harrison Blackwood used to be. The money was life-changing, yes. But as she stood there, alone, in the cavernous silence of the penthouse, she wondered if the price for her own life would be the slow erosion of her soul. The cage had 2 prisoners now. The first year was a frozen hell. Harrison was a master of psychological warfare. He found Audrey's pressure points and pressed them with surgical cruelty. He insulted her clothes, her cooking, the way she walked. He'd accidentally knock over glasses of water, forcing her to clean them up. He'd refuse to eat the meals she spent hours preparing, demanding something else, only to reject that too. He was testing her, pushing her, waiting for her to crack, to scream, to quit like all the others. But Audrey had a deep well of patience, dug by years of dealing with difficult customers and the quiet grief of her own life. She responded to his venom with unshakable professionalism. Her voice remained, even her hands, steady. She'd clean up the spills without comment. She'd calmly present an alternative meal. Her refusal to engage in his drama was, in itself, a form of defiance that infuriated him more than any argument could. Slowly, imperceptibly, the dynamic began to shift. It wasn't one grand moment, but a series of tiny concessions, cracks appearing in his formidable armor. It started with the books. One rainy afternoon, she found him staring at the bookshelf, his expression one of profound frustration. He couldn't reach the top shelf where a collection of classic seafaring adventures sat gathering dust. He would never ask for help. Pride was the last bastion of his identity. Without a word, Audrey fetched the step stool, pulled down Moby Dick, and placed it in his lap. He glared at her, his jaw tight. I didn't ask for that. I know, she replied softly. But I thought you might like to read it. The forecast says rain all week. He didn't touch the book for 2 days, but on the 3rd morning, she came in to find it open on the table beside his chair, a bookmark halfway through. Then came the nightmares. They were violent, thrashing episodes, where he relived the screech of tires, the shattering of glass. He'd wake up drenched in sweat, his voice a raw cry of terror. The first time it happened, Audrey rushed in, and his instinct was to lash out, shouting at her to get out. But she didn't. She simply stood in the doorway until his breathing slowed her presence, a silent, calming anchor in the dark. The next time she brought him a glass of water. By the 6th month, he would allow her to sit in the chair across the room until he fell back into a fitful sleep. He never acknowledged it in the morning, but the insults that followed were always less sharp, their edges slightly dulled. The turning point came a little over a year into her employment. Genevieve and her husband, a slick corporate lawyer named Robert Vance, made one of their infrequent visits. They treated Harrison with a cloying, condescending pity that set Audrey's teeth on edge. They spoke about him as if he weren't there, discussing stock prices and board meetings. "We're handling everything, Harrison. Don't you worry your head about it," Robert said, patting his shoulder with false familiarity. Of course, Genevieve added, her eyes sweeping the room, assessing the assets. "You just focus on resting." Harrison's face was a mask of thunderous rage. He hated their pity even more than he hated his own condition. After they left, the silence in the penthouse was suffocating. Harrison wheeled himself to the darkest corner of the room, his back to her. Audrey hesitated, then decided to take a risk. She walked over to the kitchen and began to bake. She didn't have her mother's cookbook, but she remembered the recipe for simple oatmeal cookies by heart. The scent of cinnamon and melting butter began to fill the sterile air, a warm, comforting aroma that was utterly alien to the penthouse. When they were done, she placed a small plate with 2 cookies and a glass of milk on the table beside him. He didn't turn. "Go away, Audrey." He muttered, his voice thick with unshed tears of fury. "My mother used to make these when I was having a bad day," she said quietly, her voice devoid of pity, filled only with a simple shared understanding of pain. She said, "You can't solve all the world's problems, but a good cookie is a start." She left the plate and retreated to her own small room. An hour later, when she came back out, the plate and glass were empty. This small act of defiance against the oppressive misery of the penthouse became a ritual. Twice a week, Audrey would bake scones, muffins, a simple lemon drizzle cake. It was her way of reclaiming a small piece of the space, of injecting a bit of life and warmth into the cold marble mausoleum. Harrison never commented, but he always ate what she made. The arrival of Dr. Peterson, a renowned physical therapist, marked the beginning of a new and even more arduous chapter. He was a brutally honest man with the physique of a former rugby player. "Walking again is a long shot, Harrison," he said on their first meeting. "A 1 in a million chance. The nerve damage was catastrophic, but your file says there's a flicker of a signal, a whisper. If you want to chase that whisper, it will be the hardest thing you've ever done. It will be agony." Harrison, buoyed by some new fragile hope, ignited by Audrey's quiet persistence, agreed. The therapy sessions were brutal. They involved a harness system that supported his weight over a treadmill and electrodes that sent jolts of electricity into his unresponsive leg muscles. The pain was excruciating. Harrison would sweat, curse, and roar in frustration as his legs refused to obey his commands. Many times he gave up ordering Dr. Peterson, out his face pale with pain and shame. It was always Audrey who brought him back from the brink. She wouldn't plead or cajole. She would simply stand by the machine, her expression calm and expectant. 5 more minutes, she'd say. "You did 10 yesterday. You can do 15 today." "I can't," he would roar, his fists clenched. "Yes, you can," she'd reply, her certainty, an infuriating, unshakable force. "I'll be right here." And something in her belief in him, a belief he hadn't felt from anyone, including himself for years, would make him grit his teeth and endure. She became his witness, his silent partner in the excruciating battle. She learned how to massage his aching muscles afterward, her touch professional but gentle. She would have his favorite protein shake ready. She celebrated every minuscule victory, a twitch in his quad, a flicker of movement in his toes, with a small, genuine smile that was more rewarding than any hollow praise. During these long, grueling years, the walls between them crumbled. He started asking her questions about the diner, about her family, about her dream of a bakery. He'd listen, his expression unreadable as she described her perfect little shop, the rolling pin with a blue door and a display case filled with croissants and fruit tarts. He in turn began to talk. He spoke of the suffocating pressure of being the heir to the Blackwood empire, of his love for sailing, of the foolish high-speed race with a business rival that had cost him everything. He revealed a dry, cynical wit that had been buried under layers of bitterness. They developed a shorthand, a comfortable silence. The penthouse started to feel less like a cage and more like a sanctuary. By the end of the 5th year, the miracle they were chasing no longer seemed impossible. With the help of braces and parallel bars, Harrison could stand. He could take hesitant, dragging steps. Each one was a monumental effort of will, a victory forged in sweat and pain. Audrey was there for every single one, her hand hovering near his back, ready to catch him, her quiet, "You've got this, Harrison." The only encouragement he needed. Genevieve and Robert's visits grew more strained. They saw Harrison's progress not as a miracle, but as a threat. A recovering Harrison was a Harrison who might want his company back. "Don't you think you're pushing yourself too hard, brother?" Genevieve would say, her concern ringing false. "You have nothing to prove." "She's pushing him," Robert added one evening, glancing at Audrey with unconcealed disdain. "A physical therapist is one thing, but a waitress playing nursemaid, she's giving you false hope. It's cruel." Harrison, his hands gripping the parallel bars, his body trembling with effort, turned his head. "Audrey has given me more than you ever have," he said, his voice low and steady. She stayed. The words hung in the air, a testament to the 6 years that had passed. 6 years of Audrey's life. 6 years of anger, pain, and slow, painstaking healing. She had arrived as a caregiver. Now she was his confidant, his motivator, his only friend. And as he stood, shaky but upright, on the precipice of a new life, she felt a profound, swelling pride. She had helped him rebuild himself. She couldn't imagine a world that didn't have him in it. The thought of leaving, of her job being over, was a pang she refused to examine too closely. For now, his victory was her own. The transition from the parallel bars to crutches was a monumental leap. The first time Harrison crossed the vast expanse of the living room on his own, with only the light rhythmic tap of the crutches on the marble floor, Audrey felt tears well in her eyes. She blinked them away quickly, not wanting to mar his triumph with her sentimentality. He stood before the window, leaning on his crutches, breathing heavily. For the first time in 6 years, he was standing at that window, not as a prisoner looking out, but as a man surveying his kingdom. The change in him was more than just physical. A new light had entered his eyes, the sharp, calculating glint of the CEO he had once been. The shift was subtle, but Audrey felt it like a change in atmospheric pressure. His phone, once a silent brick on his nightstand, began to ring incessantly. Calls from board members, from division heads, from the army of lawyers and accountants that managed Blackwood Industries. His conversations were clipped, authoritative, filled with jargon about acquisitions and market shares that Audrey didn't understand. He started taking meetings in the penthouse's home office, a room that had been her quiet reading spot for years. The doors were now closed. The comfortable silences they once shared were replaced by a new tense quiet. Audrey found herself relegated back to the role of caregiver, fetching coffee-preparing meals that were often eaten distractedly over spreadsheets, and tidying up a space that was once again filling with the energy of big business. She felt a growing sense of dislocation, as if she were a ghost in a life she had helped to rebuild. Genevieve and Robert were now constant fixtures. They arrived with briefcases and worried expressions, huddling with Harrison in the office for hours. Their attitude towards Audrey had shifted from dismissive disdain to a sharp, overt hostility. They saw her as a relic of Harrison's sick period, a reminder of a weakness he needed to shed. One afternoon, Audrey brought a tray of coffee into the office. The three of them stopped talking abruptly, their heads snapping towards her. The air was thick with conspiracy. "Thank you, Audrey. That will be all," Harrison said, his tone cool and distant. He didn't look at her. He was looking at a financial report, his brow furrowed. The "please" that had crept into his vocabulary over the years was gone. As she turned to leave, she heard Genevieve's voice, a poisonous whisper. "You have to be careful, Harrison. Her influence, people could see it as a vulnerability. A man in your position can't be seen as being dependent on his help." Audrey's hand faltered on the doorknob. She felt a cold dread seep into her bones. She wasn't just being pushed aside. She was being framed as a liability. The true whisper of betrayal came from Robert. He found her in the kitchen a few days later, his slick, insincere smile firmly in place. "Audrey." He began, leaning against the counter as if they were old friends. "I wanted to thank you on behalf of the family. What you've done for Harrison. It's remarkable, truly." Audrey murmured a non-committal thanks, continuing to wipe down the already spotless counter. "The thing is," Robert continued, his voice dropping conspiratorially, "Harrison is back. The real Harrison. The man who built this empire is a predator, Audrey. He doesn't have friends. He has assets, and he's a master at using people to get what he wants." She stopped wiping and looked at him. "What are you trying to say, Robert?" "I'm saying you were a tool, a very effective one. You motivated him. You gave him the emotional support he needed to recover. But now, your purpose is served. He's not the man who needed you to read to him anymore. He's shedding his old skin, and that includes you. I'm just worried about you. He won't be gentle about it. When he's done with you, he'll discard you. I've seen him do it 12 times in the boardroom." He let the words hang in the air, a seed of pure poison. "Genevieve and I have prepared a very generous severance package for you, a token of our gratitude. It would be wise to take it and leave quietly, before he has the chance to fire you himself. It would be less humiliating for you." Audrey stared at him, her heart pounding. Every cold glance from Harrison, every closed-door meeting, every dismissed pleasantry from the past few weeks suddenly clicked into place, forming a horrifying picture. Was this true? Had the bond she thought they'd forged been nothing more than a calculated means to an end for him? Had her 6 years of devotion been just one long business transaction? She thought of the shared laughter over a burnt batch of scones, the raw vulnerability in his eyes after a nightmare, the way he'd grip her hand for a split second after a grueling therapy session. Had it all been an act, the Harrison she knew wouldn't be this cruel. But the real Harrison that Robert described, the ruthless CEO. Maybe he would. "I work for Mr. Blackwood," Audrey said, her voice shaking slightly. "If he wants me to leave, he can tell me himself." Robert's smile soured. "Suit yourself. Just don't say I didn't warn you." That night, Audrey couldn't sleep. She replayed Robert's words over and over, searching for a flaw in their terrible logic. She had to know the truth. She crept out of her room and walked silently down the hallway to the office. The door was slightly ajar, and a sliver of light cut across the dark marble floor. She could hear voices inside Harrison and his sister. "It has to be done." "Harrison," Genevieve was saying, her voice firm. "The board is already nervous about your long absence. They need to see strength, decisiveness, no loose ends." "I understand," Harrison's voice replied. It was cold, flat, utterly devoid of the warmth Audrey had come to know. "She's a loose end," Genevieve pressed. "A waitress from a diner. It's a PR nightmare waiting to happen. People will say you were taken advantage of in a weakened state. We have to control the narrative. We announce your return, your complete recovery. And she just quietly disappears. It's cleaner this way. It's for the good of the company." There was a long pause. Audrey held her breath, her entire being focused on his reply, praying he would defend her, that he would tell his sister she was wrong. "You're right," Harrison said finally. "The company comes first. It always has. I'll handle it." The words hit Audrey like a physical blow. She backed away from the door, a hand clapped over her mouth to stifle a sob. It was true. All of it. She wasn't his friend. She was a loose end. A PR nightmare. An inconvenience to be handled. 6 years of her life, of her care, of her belief in him, and it all came down to a business decision. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it hollowed her out, leaving nothing but a vast, echoing emptiness. She stumbled back to her room, the beautiful view from the penthouse windows, now looking like a view from the edge of a cliff. The day Harrison took his first unaided step was supposed to be a day of pure triumph. For weeks, he had been practicing in secret with Dr. Peterson, pushing himself past the point of exhaustion. He wanted it to be a surprise, a grand reveal. He summoned Audrey to the living room one afternoon. He was standing in the middle of the room, unassisted, with no crutches, no walker, no harness. He was unsteady, his legs trembling from the effort. But he was standing. His face was beaded with sweat, but his eyes were blazing with a fierce, triumphant light. "Watch this, Audrey," he said, his voice tight with concentration. He took a step, then another, and another. A slow, deliberate, miraculous journey across the marble floor. Audrey's breath caught in her throat. All the pain, the struggle, the years of relentless effort, it had all led to this. This was the miracle. Tears of joy and relief streamed down her face. She wanted to run to him, to hug him, to share in this incredible victory that she had been so intimately a part of. But when he reached the other side of the room and turned to face her, his expression was not one of shared joy. It was one of cool, detached accomplishment. He looked at her tears with a flicker of annoyance. "There's no need to be sentimental," he said, his voice clipped. "This was always the goal." The coldness of his tone stopped her in her tracks. The warm bubble of shared victory popped, leaving her shivering in the suddenly frigid air. The man who had just crossed the room was not the Harrison she had helped. This was Harrison Blackwood, CEO, a man who viewed emotion as a weakness. The days that followed were a confirmation of her worst fears. Harrison's recovery accelerated, and with each new physical milestone, he grew more emotionally distant. He now walked with the aid of a single elegant ebony cane, a prop that made him look less like a patient and more like a formidable tycoon. He held a press conference to announce his return. Audrey watched it on the television in the kitchen, feeling like an outsider in her own home. He was brilliant. He was charming, witty, and powerful. He spoke of his period of reflection and his renewed vision for Blackwood Industries. He thanked his dedicated medical team. He never mentioned her name. She was erased from the narrative, a footnote that had been deemed unnecessary. The whispers she had overheard became Harrison's reality. His life was once again a whirlwind of board meetings, strategic lunches, and black-tie charity events. The penthouse, their shared sanctuary, became his corporate headquarters. Strangers in expensive suits came and went, their briefcases clicking, their voices low and serious. Audrey was invisible to them, just part of the furniture. She tried to talk to him, to bridge the chasm that had opened between them. One evening, she found him on the terrace, staring out at the city lights, the ebony cane resting against his chair. "Harrison," she began softly, "we haven't really talked." He turned his face, illuminated by the city glow. It was a handsome, powerful face, but it was a stranger's face. "We're talking now." "This is all amazing," she said, gesturing vaguely at the city. "Your recovery, you taking back the company, it's everything we worked for." The "we" slipped out a relic of a partnership that no longer existed. His eyes narrowed slightly. "I worked for it, Audrey. Dr. Peterson worked for it. You were compensated for your time." The words were a slap. Compensated. It reduced 6 years of her life, her care, her emotional investment, to a simple financial transaction. Robert's warning echoed in her ears. "He's shedding his old skin, and that includes you." "Is that all it was to you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "A job, was I just an employee?" He took a long, slow breath, turning his gaze back to the city. "You were an excellent employee, the best I've ever had. But my life is different now. My responsibilities are immense. The company requires my full attention. There's no room for distractions." Distractions. That's what she was now. A distraction. A loose end. The final devastating proof of her obsolescence came a week later. Harrison was hosting a massive gala at the Blackwood Tower to celebrate his official reinstatement as CEO. It was the talk of the city. The guest list was a who's who of finance, politics, and society. Audrey, of course, was not invited. She was expected to remain in the penthouse, out of sight. The evening of the gala, the penthouse was quiet for the first time in weeks. The silence was deafening. She walked through the rooms, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. She touched the back of the chair where she used to sit and read to him. She ran a hand over the kitchen counter where she'd baked him cookies. It was a farewell tour of a life that was already over. Her pain was a physical ache in her chest. It wasn't just about being discarded. It was about the utter negation of their shared history. He hadn't just moved on. He had rewritten the past, erasing her from it completely. The man she had cared for, the man she had come to care for deeply, had vanished. In his place was this cold, ruthless stranger who looked at her and saw nothing of value. She packed her few belongings into a small suitcase. Her mother's cookbook, a few changes of clothes, the worn-out uniform from the diner. It wasn't much to show for 6 years of her life. She looked at the severance check Robert had left on her dresser. It was for an astronomical sum, enough to buy 10 bakeries. But it felt like blood money, a payment for her silence and her disappearance. She couldn't stay another minute. She couldn't bear to see him return from his party, flushed with success, and have him look through her one last time before dismissing her. She wrote a short, simple note. "Goodbye, Harrison. I wish you all the best," and left it on his pillow. As she stepped into the elevator, the doors sliding shut on the opulent penthouse, she finally allowed the tears to fall. They were not the tears of joy she had shed when he first walked. They were tears of profound, shattering heartbreak for the man she had lost, and for the foolish woman who had allowed herself to believe she meant something to him. Audrey didn't go far. She couldn't. The city was a maze of memories, every street corner a potential ghost. She ended up at the only place that felt real, the Dawnlight Diner. It was closed, the lights off, but old Mr. Henderson, the owner, lived in the apartment above. She knocked on his side door, her suitcase in hand, her face streaked with tears. He took one look at her and enveloped her in a hug that smelled of coffee and bacon grease. He didn't ask many questions. He just gave her the spare room a cup of hot tea and the quiet comfort of being with someone who had known her before her life had been consumed by the Blackwood monolith. For 2 days, Audrey existed in a fog of grief. She helped Mr. Henderson in the diner, the familiar routine of filling salt shakers and wiping tables, a small comfort. The work was mindless, allowing her to process the magnitude of her heartbreak. The betrayal felt like a phantom limb, an ache where something vital used to be. Every time the bell above the diner door jingled, her head would snap up a foolish, traitorous part of her hoping to see Harrison cane in hand, coming to explain it all away. On the 3rd day, a familiar face walked in. It was Maria, one of the long-time housekeepers from the penthouse, a kind, middle-aged woman with whom Audrey had often shared a quiet cup of coffee in the early mornings. "Audrey, thank God I found you," Maria said, her face etched with worry. She slid a thick cream-colored envelope across the table. "This is for you. From me, not from him." It was an invitation to the Blackwood gala. "It's tonight," Maria whispered, leaning in. "Something isn't right, Audrey. The way he looks, the way his sister, and that weasel of a husband of hers are always at his side. It's like they have him on a leash. He's not the man, he was not even the angry one from the beginning. He's hollow. And he asked me very quietly yesterday if I knew where you'd gone. He looked lost. Please, you should go. You need to see this for yourself." Audrey's first instinct was to refuse. Why would she subject herself to more pain? But Maria's words planted a tiny seed of doubt. Lost. It didn't fit with the cold, calculating CEO she had last seen. Against her better judgment, she decided to go. She had nothing left to lose, and a desperate need for a final definitive answer. She wore the only formal dress she owned, a simple dark blue sheath she'd bought for a wedding years ago. It felt inadequate as she entered the grand ballroom of the Blackwood Tower. The room was a glittering spectacle of wealth and power. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, champagne flowed like water, and the air hummed with the conversations of the city's elite. She stayed on the periphery, a shadow in the corner, feeling utterly out of place. She saw him across the room, surrounded by a crowd of admirers. He looked magnificent in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. He laughed. He shook hands. He exuded an aura of absolute control. He was the king in his court. Genevieve and Robert were flanking him, their faces smug with victory. Audrey's heart sank. Maria was wrong. This was not a man who was lost. This was a man who had found exactly what he wanted. The pain of her decision to come was sharp and immediate. She turned to leave, to slip away before he could see her, and she'd have to endure the ultimate humiliation of him looking at her with pity or worse, indifference. As she moved towards the exit, she passed by a secluded alcove, partially hidden by a large floral arrangement. She heard familiar voices from within Genevieve and Robert. She froze, pressing herself back into the shadows. "It's working perfectly," Genevieve was saying, her voice giddy with success. "He's playing his part beautifully. The board is eating it up. They see the old Harrison." "He had us worried for a while there," Robert replied, a clink of glasses following his words. "All that time with the waitress. I was afraid he'd gone soft. It's a good thing we managed to get her out of the picture. She was the last person who could have made him question us." Audrey's blood ran cold. Genevieve laughed, a low, cruel sound. "Please, she was a nobody. But you were right to plant those seeds of doubt. Making him believe she was a liability was a stroke of genius. And him being so cold to her, To push her away, perfect. It isolated him completely. Now he only has us to trust. A wave of nausea washed over Audrey. So it was a setup. They had manipulated him, turned him against her. But the relief she should have felt was instantly extinguished by Genevieve's next words. The final phase is tomorrow, Genevieve continued. At the emergency board meeting, we present the evidence of his cognitive decline during his recovery. The forged therapist reports the testimony from the caregivers we paid off before we found the gullible waitress. We'll argue that this sudden return to power is a manic episode. We'll cite his erratic decision to fire his entire loyal household staff this morning as proof. We'll file for a conservatorship. The board is already primed to see him as unstable. We'll have full control of the company by noon. Audrey could barely breathe. It was a coup, a complete vicious takeover. They hadn't just sabotaged his emotional recovery. They had been plotting to steal his entire life's work. Firing the staff. That was the proof they needed. He had played right into their hands. She had to warn him. She pushed her way through the glittering crowd, her heart hammering against her ribs. People stared at her, a frantic, simply dressed woman in a sea of couture. She didn't care. She finally broke through the circle surrounding Harrison, just as he was stepping up to a small podium. "Harrison!" She cried out, her voice raw. He turned. His eyes met hers across the small space. For a split second, she saw a flash of something in his expression, shock pain, something complex and unreadable before it was replaced by a mask of cold fury. Genevieve and Robert were instantly at his side, looking at Audrey as if she were a venomous snake. "Security!" Genevieve hissed. "Get her out of here! Harrison, you have to listen to me!" Audrey pleaded, ignoring the two security guards who were now moving towards her. "They're plotting against you, Genevieve and Robert. They're planning to have you declared incompetent tomorrow. They're going to take the company." The crowd gasped. A hush fell over the ballroom. Everyone stared first at the hysterical woman, then at the billionaire she was accusing. Harrison looked down at her from the podium, his face an unreadable granite slab. His eyes were glacial. "I have no idea who this woman is," he said, his voice ringing out with cold, clear authority. "She's clearly disturbed. Perhaps a disgruntled former employee. Remove her. Now." The words shattered the last vestiges of Audrey's hope. "I have no idea who this woman is. After 6 years, after everything, he wasn't being manipulated. He was part of it. Or worse, he was so weak, so cowed by them that he would sacrifice her to save himself." The security guards took her arms. The humiliation was absolute. She was being dragged out of the ballroom like a madwoman, the whispers and stares of hundreds of people following her. Her eyes stayed locked on Harrison's. He didn't flinch. He just watched her go, his expression one of utter dismissive contempt. As they hauled her through the doors, her last sight was of Harrison, turning back to the microphone Genevieve and Robert, smiling triumphantly at his side. The betrayal was complete, public, and absolute. It wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was a deafening roar that destroyed everything she had ever believed. Her tears weren't from heartbreak now. They were from the sheer soul-crushing agony of his ultimate deception. Audrey was deposited onto the curb outside the tower, the cold night air a shock after the overheated ballroom. The city lights blurred through her tears. It was over. She had been a fool twice, over first for believing he cared, and second for believing he could be saved. He was one of them. A Blackwood. Ruthless, cold, and willing to sacrifice anyone for his own gain. The shame was a physical weight pressing down on her, making it hard to breathe. She hailed the first taxi she saw, giving Mr. Henderson's address in a choked whisper, wanting nothing more than to crawl into a dark room and never come out. Back inside the glittering ballroom, a tense silence had fallen. Genevieve stepped up to the microphone, her face a mask of concerned sympathy. "My apologies, everyone. My brother's situation has attracted some unstable individuals. Please enjoy the evening." But as she turned back, she saw Harrison was not looking at her. He was looking at the double doors through which Audrey had been dragged, a flicker of genuine, agonizing pain in his eyes. It was there for only a second before it was gone, replaced by his icy mask. He tapped the microphone. "If I could have your attention for one more moment." Harrison said, his voice calm and steady. "My sister is right. There are unstable individuals in the world, and sometimes they are standing right next to you." He turned his gaze directly on Genevieve and Robert. A large screen behind the podium, which had been displaying the Blackwood Industries logo, suddenly flickered to life. It showed a grainy black and white video. It was security footage from the penthouse office, date-stamped 2 days prior. On the screen, Genevieve and Robert were talking. The audio was crystal clear. "The final phase is tomorrow," Genevieve's voice echoed through the silent ballroom. "At the emergency board meeting, we present the evidence of his cognitive decline," the forged therapist reports. "We'll have full control of the company by noon." The crowd gasped. Genevieve's face went white with shock. Robert looked like he was going to be physically ill. "For 6 years," Harrison said, his voice now filled with a cold, righteous fury that was nothing like the bitterness Audrey had known, "I fought to get my life back. And for 6 years, I had one person who believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself." He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. "And for the last 6 months, I have known that my own sister and her husband were plotting to steal everything from me. I learned of their plan to have me declared incompetent. The forged reports, the paid-off witnesses, the entire sickening conspiracy." He looked at Genevieve. "Did you really think I was so broken that I couldn't see the vipers in my own nest? Did you think I was that stupid?" He pressed a button on the podium. A new audio file played. It was his conversation with Genevieve, the one Audrey had overheard. "She's a loose end," Genevieve's voice said. "You're right," Harrison's recorded voice replied. "The company comes first. It always has. I'll handle it." "I knew she was listening," Harrison said to the horrified crowd, his voice thick with emotion. "I knew they had set me up to push her away, and I had to let them think it was working. I had to be cold. I had to be distant. I had to be the ruthless man they wanted me to be. It was the only way to get them to reveal their entire hand. Pushing Audrey away was the hardest thing I have ever had to do." His gaze fell upon the doors again. "And tonight I had to commit the ultimate act of cruelty. I had to destroy the one person I trust in front of all of you. I had to publicly deny her, humiliate her, to make my act believable, to ensure my sister and her husband felt secure enough to be in this room when the trap was sprung. I had to break her heart to save my life. And I will spend the rest of my days hoping she can forgive me." He turned his full attention back to Genevieve and Robert, who were frozen in a state of pure terror. "As for you two, my erratic decision to fire my loyal household staff this morning wasn't erratic at all. It was to replace them with private investigators and security personnel. Every conversation you have had in this building for the past 48 hours has been recorded. The evidence of your conspiracy fraud and attempted corporate theft has already been delivered to the district attorney's office, and to every member of the board." He gestured to the back of the room, where 2 grim-faced police officers had just entered. "I believe these gentlemen are here for you." As Genevieve and Robert were escorted out, a stunned silence gave way to a flurry of frantic whispers. Harrison ignored them all. He stepped down from the podium, took his ebony cane, and walked not with the practiced confidence of his performance, but with the determined, unsteady gait of a man on the most important mission of his life. He walked straight out of the ballroom, leaving the chaos behind him. He had a debt to repay. The bell on the door of the Dawnlight Diner jingled. Audrey, who was sitting in a booth nursing a cold cup of tea, didn't look up. She assumed it was Mr. Henderson coming down for the morning prep. Audrey. Her head snapped up. Harrison was standing there, his tuxedo looking absurdly out of place in the greasy spoon. He was leaning heavily on his cane, his face pale and exhausted, but his eyes were filled with a desperate, pleading vulnerability she hadn't seen since the worst days of his recovery. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice flat and dead. "Come to make sure the disturbed woman hasn't caused any more trouble." He flinched as if she'd struck him. "I deserve that," he said quietly. "I deserve that, and so much more. Everything you saw, everything I said tonight, it was a lie. A terrible, necessary lie." He walked slowly to her booth and sank into the seat opposite her. He began to talk, his voice raw with sincerity. He told her everything, about discovering the plot months ago, about his agonizing decision to play along, about the torment of having to be cruel to her, about the performance at the gala. He explained that his public denial of her was the final critical piece of the charade. "I had to make them believe I had completely severed ties with you, that you meant nothing to me," he said, his voice cracking. "Because you, Audrey, you were the only one they feared. You were the only one who made me strong. They knew that as long as I had you, I wasn't truly alone. I had to seem alone for them to make their move." Audrey listened, the icy shell around her heart beginning to crack. The pain was still there, but beneath it, a fragile seedling of understanding began to sprout. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. "Why did you let me believe—" "To protect you," he said, his blue eyes locking on hers. "If they knew you were in on it, they would have come after you. They would have found a way to hurt you to get to me. I couldn't risk that. I would have rather lost the entire company than put you in danger. So I chose to hurt you myself in a way I prayed I could one day fix." He reached across the table, his hand hovering over hers, not daring to touch her without permission. "Those 6 years weren't a transaction, Audrey. They weren't a job. You didn't just care for me. You saved me. Not my body, but my soul. You walked into my hell, and you stayed not out of pity, but out of a strength I've never known. You showed me what decency was again." Tears were now streaming down both their faces. "What I did to you tonight, it was unforgivable," he said. "And I know I have no right to ask for anything. But I have to try." He pushed a set of keys and a thick legal document across the table. "This won't fix it. Words won't fix it. But maybe it's a start." She looked down. It was the deed to the building next door to the diner, the vacant storefront she had wistfully pointed out to Mr. Henderson 100 times. "I bought it 6 months ago," Harrison said softly. "When I first realized what I would have to do. I needed something to hold on to, something to prove that there would be an after. It's been under renovation ever since. It's empty, ready for you, for your blue door, your display cases, for the rolling pin." Audrey stared at the deed, her name printed in bold official letters. Audrey Collins, proprietor. She looked from the paper to his face, and she saw it all, the truth, the regret, the profound, terrifying depth of his feelings. He hadn't just given her a gift. He had listened to her dreams when she thought no one was, and he had held on to them for her when she had let them go. The tears that came now were not of pain or betrayal. They were tears of overwhelming, cathartic release. The shattered pieces of her heart were not just being mended. They were being forged into something stronger, something more beautiful. He hadn't just walked again. He had walked through fire to clear a path for her for them. And in that quiet, humble diner, surrounded by the smell of old coffee and new beginnings, Audrey Collins finally took his hand. In the end, Harrison Blackwood's greatest act was not taking back his billion-dollar empire, but in recognizing the priceless value of a loyal heart. Audrey Collins gave 6 years of her life to a broken man facing his darkness with a light he thought was extinguished forever. The betrayal she endured was a calculated, painful gambit in a war she didn't know he was fighting. But his final gesture, not of charity, but of deep, attentive love, proved that he had learned the most important lesson of all, that true wealth is not what you own, but what you would do anything to protect. Their story is a powerful reminder that in a world of glass towers and cold transactions, the most profound connections are built on simple kindness, unwavering loyalty, and the courage to fight for a shared dream. What did you think of Harrison's desperate plan? Was his public betrayal of Audrey justified to expose his family's treachery? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of sacrifice and ultimate vindication moved you, please give this video a like, share it with someone who loves a story with a twist, and don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettable real-life dramas.